Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke alongside Jack because today we are going to look at the top 10 budget decks from Primal Clash into the Sun and Moon format. There's a few new cards and some adapting archetypes thanks to these new cards from Sun and Moon, so we thought it would be a good time to re-update our top 10 budget decks. Always a popular video, so we'll be getting straight into it.
Yeah.
Oops.
So
Carry on.
so starting us off, we've got some general tips rather than going into each deck individually. Just tips that can be applied to pretty much any card game in general, but especially to the whole card game itself. Try and keep these in mind when you're going into looking at how or first starting up playing the game, because all of these will be really useful. The first thing is proxy before you purchase. So obviously we get new cards 4 times throughout the year, and rather than going straight into it and buying all of the cards from the new set straight away that you think are good, try them out first. It's something that me and Joe do a lot. Rather than just buying everything from a set that we think is good, we see what really has potential, and before we put a lot of money into it. It means that you're sort of not let down when things don't go as well for a certain card that you've maybe had your eye on. And you may also find some other things that may be relatively cheap as well because people aren't hyping them that you enjoy. So proxying is a really, really good idea, especially when new sets come out.
Yeah, definitely. Moving on from that, we have trying to purchase staples, which fit into the majority of decks. These are sort of cards that are transferable between archetypes. It's particularly more so than anything else in terms of other card games. It's a real trait in Pokemon specifically, where there are oftentimes around 20-ish cards which can get subbed in and out of pretty much any deck in the format. Cards like Ultra Ball, VS Seeker, Professor Sycamore, and N are oftentimes 4 counts in a lot of different decks. So keeping your eye on these, looking down other videos, other successful deck lists that get posted on the official Pokemon website, and you see the recurring trainer cards come up over and over again, it's worth potentially picking up those, because not only will they help you make your first deck list, but potentially in future you'll have already got the cards you need for the majority of other decks as well. Yeah,
definitely. The third point is a little bit of a sad one, but it is money-wise the best way to do it. Buy singles, not boosters. The feeling of ripping open a booster and looking what you've got is great, but ultimately they're not the most cost-efficient way of getting cards, because the odds of you getting the exact card you need are pretty low. So buying singles, unfortunately, is usually the way to go from an economic standpoint. Like I say, it's obviously not as enjoyable, but at least for these first few, especially for the staples, it's best to just sort of bulk buy 4 of these really good cards rather than trying to open up some old Phantom Forces packs to try and get VS Seekers or whatever. Just look for the singles instead, because you're going to save yourself a lot of money.
Yeah, that's a real sad one, but unfortunately it's the way to go. Keeping an eye out for promos is also a really good thing to try and get into. Oftentimes release dates are given to us, months in advance, so we know, for example, that Solgaleo GX, which has only recently come out in Sun and Moon, is also going to be in tins coming in the future. And if you can pretty much hold off till then, you can just say, you know what, I don't need to get my Solgaleos now. I can either buy the tins themselves or just buy the promo card itself, which is probably going to be a cheaper alternative to buying singles of the current Solgaleo from the booster packs. Similarly, you can get things like theme decks and league promos. Definitely if you're an absolute beginner, theme decks can be good if you're looking to start a certain archetype. If you want to start, for example, you're going to go for a Volcanion deck, not only do you get a couple non-EX Volcanion in that deck, but you also get a lot of the Fire Energies and a few trainer cards in there as well, which can help you. So all these things, cheaper alternatives, cheaper artworks and stuff like that. The cards read exactly the same, as long as you don't mind looking at sometimes a worse looking card. It does the right thing for you in terms of getting you into the game. So yeah, these are oftentimes good alternatives.
Definitely. Borrowing and sharing collections with people you trust is always a good sort of avenue. If you can't always buy a lot of these cards at once, especially as Pokemon has around 8 sets in rotation at a time, minimum, That can be an overwhelming amount of cards. So maybe you've happened to pick up 3 Yveltal EX, and you know someone that wants to play Yveltal and you want to play Darkrai who has Darkrai's. Maybe you can do a little bit of a swap just for the day. See if you can borrow their Darkrai's and they can borrow your Yveltals. You both get to play the decks you want, and you don't have to go out and buy 3 Darkrai in the rush before that tournament, especially as you may be lending your Yveltals away anyway. So as long as you know that these people are trustworthy people, the Pokemon community on the whole is really, really good. And a lot of the time, there's going to be nothing wrong with doing that. Just making sure you know exactly what your cards or who your cards are going to is the main thing. But yeah, having sort of a shared collection can really sort of widen your card pool, and it can really help you, especially again, sort of pairing it with proxies. It means that you can see whether you really like a card and really like a deck before you end up sort of buying into the deck.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, for example, me and you, every time a new set comes out, we'll sort of divvy up, what we want from the set between us, and it literally halves our cost, and we are able to play everything at any given tournament. So
yeah,
good for not only newer players, but even current players. It's good advice, I think. Definitely if you have a good friendship group with 1 or 2 people or lots of people, it can be very helpful. And finally, being aware of format rotation is especially important right now, because there's often going to be a debate in the Pokemon community around getting Shaymin EX in particular. And we'll get onto that in a moment, but basically every year there are 3 or 4 sets often, mainly 3, get rotated each year. That means that they're no longer legal for the standard format, and that's mainly the format that gets played. It's the format that's played at Worlds and other large-scale events, although sometimes there are still expanded tournaments around. For the most part, these cards are no longer usable for you. So if you're just trying to get into the game now, you may have to keep an eye on these things, and throughout this video we'll give you little spot checks to let you know when a certain archetype we're talking about may not last for a long time. So it's good to be aware of this. Maybe buying some of the newer cards, even if they're not great now, they're going to stay around for longer and they'll have more chance to become good in the future as new sets come out. So that's something to be aware of as well.
Yeah. So the next big thing is the Shaymin debate, whether it's worth buying Shaymins or whether it's worth trying to play without this card. And I think it's at a really interesting point at the moment. So we've just had a second print run, we'll call it, of Roaring Skies, and that's the set that Shaymin is in. Shaymin is an incredibly good card. It's run of as pretty much a two of in most competitive decks. It's not run in all decks. There's not you don't have to play this card, but a lot of decks do play it, and a lot of decks do perform better with it. So yeah, we've just had the second print run of Roaring Skies, and after the rotation last year, Shaymin sort of jumped in price. This year, it's with the second print run, it has dropped in value, which is it's good, but still it's quite an expensive card. They're still $30 to $35 just to pick up one, and you're going to need 2 sort of as a minimum usually if you want to replicate some of these winning lists. So that's $70 just based on 2 cards. And whilst these cards are in pretty much every deck, that's still a lot of money, especially as Shaymin is very likely to be rotating out of the standard format come September. We haven't had confirmation of a rotation, but looking at where we're at on paper and looking at where the format is going and things like this, it's incredibly likely that Shaymin will be rotating. So it's whether you mind perhaps playing for 6 months without Shaymins, maybe proxying them and just going to League for a while, rather than trying to play in big tournaments without Shaymins. You can, if you can hold off for 6 months, then the standard format is likely to be without Shaymin, which means that you'd have effectively saved yourself $70. I know a couple of people from the league that I go to, and they personally haven't bought Shaymins. They only got into the game about 6 months ago, and because they realized that it probably would be rotating out in not too long a time, even back then they were like, do we want to spend this amount of money on just a couple of cards that eventually are going to rotate out? And the player that hasn't been playing Shaymins has been doing completely fine. He's been winning tournaments. He's been getting CP. So Shaymin is by no means a card that you have to use to win. It just ups your win percentage in some cases for some decks.
Yeah, and basically this list is going to show off decks that don't require Shaymin at all, Sometimes you can get away with 0, although sometimes some of the cards or some of the decks on this list can still put in a Shaman, and they may perform better. So bear that in mind. But really, just at the moment, not playing Shaman pretty much just limits your options in terms of what you can play. But that's not to say that you can't still play and still play at a top level. Okay, let's get into the first deck of the list, Jack.
Yeah, Houndoom Bunnelby is one that I've actually played a little bit in the past couple of weeks. Me and a friend have been playing it, and it's a deck that doesn't really require. This is one of the ones that doesn't really require Shaman at all anyway. It's essentially a mill deck, which is rather than the natural taking 6 prizes and winning the game that way, you attempt to run your opponent out of cards. If they can't draw a card at the start of their turn, they automatically lose the game. So you've got Houndoom EX, which discards his attack, discards the top 2 cards from your opponent's deck. We've got some supporters, things like Team Rocket's Handiwork, that also try and mill through your opponent's deck. And this is all done relatively simply. There's not much setup. You just need a Houndoom and an energy. There's a lot of different tricks this deck can play. There's a lot of sort of energy denial things that you can take. And yeah, it's a really, really interesting alternative win condition deck. So as you can see, we've got strengths and weaknesses for each of these decks. The strength, as I've said, very little setup. You need 1 energy and 1 Houndoom to start the mill going, which is really, really strong. Heavily disruptive. Obviously, we've got a lot of these what I'm going to call hammer cards that get rid of your opponent's energy, meaning they can't attack you, they can't take prizes, they can't fulfill their own win condition. That can also be complemented by the Raticate down at the bottom, which does more damage the more special energy your opponent has in their discard pile. So whilst this deck is a mill deck, it does have options to take 6 prizes as well. There are a lot of different options for this deck. Whilst the 6 prize route is a lot more difficult to fulfill, it can be just an outright win condition sometimes if your opponent's maybe only playing 4 double colorless or something like that. So yeah, we've got heavily disruptive and little setup, and can build to the budget. There are a lot of ways you can play Houndoom. Essentially, the baseline is just running Houndoom, and then you can add in Pokemon, add in different Pokemon as and when you see fit. There's Raticate. I've seen some lists with Slowking, which are pretty cool. There's a lot of different sort of disruption Pokemon in the format right now. I think Crawdaunt is also in the format as well, which is another really, really cool one.
And Gumshoe's GX as well.
Yeah, there's loads of different Pokemon that you can pair with Houndoom. Just because he doesn't require a lot of setup, you've got a lot of space to add in all of these really interesting cards that maybe you don't get to play with much. Obviously, Raticate and things like Crawdaunt and Slowking fit this playstyle much better than a 6 prize taking playstyle. So it means that you can really use some of these interesting Pokemon that don't see too much play.
Yeah, definitely. I actually really like the Gumshoes as well from Sun and Moon. I think that's really cool. If you originally buy Houndoom and you're happy with your list, you can maybe then look to buy 1 or 2 Gumshoes to add in, because it combos nicely with Skullgrunt. And also, when the deck is when your opponent is getting out of control with their damage output, attacking with Gumshoes is also really cool for you, because it does damage 50 times the amount of energy attached to the opponent's active Pokemon, with a 10 base on that as well. So if anything just gets out of hand, and like maybe you've been drawing poorly, and Gumshoes just sort of comes in and is a check to anything that just gets too out of control, which is really cool. For weaknesses of the deck, it is fairly reliant on flip cards. Crushing Hammer is one of the biggest cards in the deck, and that obviously requires a coin flip. So too does the Team Rocket's Handiwork supporter card as well, which mills cards off the top of the deck. So it's quite RNG reliant on top of all the draw RNG that you already have in Pokemon, so that's quite awkward sometimes, and it could be frustrating to play, let alone play against. Also, there's a lot of reactive cards in the deck, and that can sometimes clunk out your hand. You could be sat on a hand where you really need to dig for something, but at the same time you don't want to discard your hand because it has a lot of resources that will eventually hurt the opponent, just not in the current state. And you have the awkward sort of stick or twist moment where you don't know what to do with your hand. And that's really because you're playing so many cards that only really interact with the opponent's side of the board. And if they haven't really got that if they've not fallen into your trap yet, then it's just sort of stuck in your hand until you can use it. And the final awkward thing for Houndoom Bunnelby is that you have to purchase a lot of cards which only really work in a mill deck. Something like Team Rocket's Handiwork will not find its way into any other list. but sometimes it can be like a 4 of in a Houndoom deck. So forking out, even if it's small amounts of money, you're putting money towards just one dedicated deck, and maybe in a month's time you get bored of Houndoom, you have to basically look for an entire new archetype and need to buy a fresh new bunch of cards. So it's not really a transferable sort of, you know how we said earlier you want to be buying the staples? Well, this is kind of like the opposite, because you're just buying a deck focused for Houndoom Bunnelby, and they won't really go anywhere else but the binder from then on.
Yeah.
Moving on to Quad Talonflame, this is one of my favourite like pet decks to play around with all the time. Some of the strengths is that it's very consistent, and you just set up a lot of the time, because starting Talonflame, thanks to its ability, just means that you have access to Aero Blitz from as early as turn 1 if you go second. It allows you to search the deck and find any 2 cards and put them straight to the hand, so doing that every turn, even for like the first 3 turns, just while you set up your board, is fantastic for you. You have supporters like Winona to get you the rest of your evolution line down. It's really consistent in my opinion, because you're just searching from the deck so often. The typing is also good. The fire typing of the Talonflame Break is pretty handy against some of the new grass things. Decidueye, Lurantis, and also the Solgaleo GX as well gets hit for weakness by Talonflame, so some of the newer cards coming out do struggle against Talonflame. It's also got a really efficient attack cost, so 170 HP on the break, whilst it only commits like 1 or 2 energy to itself. It can be awkward for things like Mewtwo and Yveltal to even one-hit KO it, so that's pretty cool. It's also a non-EX focused deck, which is awesome, forcing your opponent into a long game drawn out while they have to take very difficult single prizes each turn. And it also looks to be a deck that, you know, in my eyes at least, I think it could be improving in the future. The introduction of Choice Band is going to change a lot of things in the next set of Sun and Moon, and I think for Talonflame it fixes a lot of numbers. 1 energy for 70 sounds very efficient to me, and then the Flare Blitz attack from the Talonflame Break goes from 150 to 180, and 180 for 2 energy is fantastic damage. It really is. So if you want to just test out the waters with Talonflame and it turns out you like it, then in the next set it's only going to get better in my eyes, so that could be a cool option for you.
Yeah, I think Talonflame is one that, if you've seen our streams, we've played around with it a little bit, and it's one that we both think we're just sort of biding our time with it. I think one day this could be a really, really fun archetype, and could, like with Choice Band, could be really good. However, there are a couple of weaknesses. It is essentially still a stage 2 deck. That first Talonflame, if you start with Talonflame in your opening hand, your Talonflame Break you can start setting that up on turn 2. You can be doing 180 or 150 on turn 2, sorry. And that's obviously really good, but that's only for one Talonflame Break. The rest of your Talonflames have to be got out using the natural stage 2 engine, whether that's rare candies or just naturally evolving. And that is in itself still a slow archetype. There's only a couple of decks that are getting away with it at the moment, and because of that, that's sort of slowness compared to some of these other decks in the format can sometimes put other matchups slightly in favor, simply because they can just set up a lot quicker than you. And obviously with Talonflame we naturally have the Gale Wings ability, but because of that, if you don't end up finding a Talonflame in your opening hand, it's going to mean that the deck doesn't even get to have that turn 2 Talonflame Break potentially. It's going to mean that you have to then start naturally evolving into your Talonflames, and whenever this is the case, the deck is a lot worse, because there are a lot of other archetypes that do better through evolving, and that sort of the big thing about Talonflame is being able to be an evolution deck, but also sort of getting your heels stuck into the game straight away, because you already have your first stage 2 out from turn 1. So it sort of builds up behind this initial stage 2. And if it doesn't start with a stage 2, it can be a little bit slower against some of these other even sort of faster archetypes. And finally, as we've mentioned, it currently is lacking some damage output, but with Choice Band, as we've said, that's set to change. So I think the biggest thing for Talonflame is try it out at the moment and watch this space, especially on Omnipoke, because I know as soon as Choice Band is released, we're going to be definitely trying this deck out. So yeah, watch this space. There may be potential here for the Talonflame Break to be a real contender.
Yeah, Choice Band Kukui, 1 for 90. That's all I'm saying. It's awesome. Okay. Next up we have Golduck. This is a new card itself. The main focus of the deck is around a new Pokemon from Sun and Moon. Golduck can deal up to 120 damage for just 1 water energy, which sounds really cool from the offset. There's a few decent strengths here. The deck is fully non-EX, and it has lots of good Pokemon search and recovery. The whole deck is 90 HP or below, unless you choose to play Golduck Break. And they're also all water types, which means you have access to 4 Level Ball, 4 Dive Ball, and that is just really awesome search for the entire deck. It means that you can get into your Starmie, your Octillery, and your Golducks fairly quickly. And not only that, once they're out on the field, because they're all water types, you can use Splash Energy. So once they are knocked out, you can get them instantly back in the hand and recycle them to make sure that you keep having a good amount of attackers every single turn. There's just great synergy with this deck. Once it starts rolling and you get into that cycle where Octillery can keep drawing you cards, Starmie keeps recovering your water energy, which is the necessary condition to get Golduck's attack working. And once you've just got Golducks with Splash Energies in the active position, as long as you're hitting that 120 every turn, it's actually very difficult to deal with. 120 from potentially turn 2 onwards in the game, as long as you have your abilities, that's actually pretty threatening. So once you get into this cycle, it can be really good for you. And I just really like this for a beginner. If you are a definite beginner in this Pokemon TCG, I do think this is a really good deck to look into, because I think it teaches a lot of fundamentals of what makes a good deck, what helps out, why it functions, how it runs, the consistency aspects. I think it teaches you a lot about the game. So even though it's not the top deck of our list, I do think this is potentially a really good one for beginners, because I think it teaches you a lot about the game.
Yeah, definitely. And I think whilst we haven't, I've been saying to a couple of people have asked both of us what we think of Golduck. Whilst it's not a top tier contender, like we're saying, it teaches so much about the game. Another thing that I think is really important is it teaches ordering and stuff. Ordering is such a huge part of the game, making sure you do things in the right order to get exactly what you want done on your turn. Things like just Octillerying before Starmieing, little things like that just help with sort of the flow of the game and knowing what order to do things in. So I think, like we're saying, it's a fantastic deck to just pick up and start to learn the game, start to learn how the game works. However, of course, there are some weaknesses. It is capped at a 120 damage output. And whilst we're saying 120 for 1 energy is really good, it means that you are going to be two-shotting EXs. Like, there's no sort of flip turns where you can just suddenly be able to one-shot an EX, which is... It can be a bit awkward, because it means that you have to really push for this prize race. And if you even miss a turn of this prize race, a lot of the time these EX decks are going to overrun you, just because they're only having to look for 90 damage per turn. Mm-hmm. Again, it's as we've said, it's heavily ability reliant, and at the moment, abilities are quite a big thing in the format in general. I think they always will be whilst we've got them, at least. But at the moment, we're seeing a lot of ability lock, and Garbodor is a big player in the format at the moment. And knowing that your Starmie and your Octillery are shut off because of this, it means that you're going to have to naturally try and search for your damage each turn, and because you're going to be two-shotting things, you're going to have to go through a lot of resources to win a race under ability lock, and it's very, very difficult to do. Finally, it is continuous setup of multiple evolution Pokemon. We've been saying how one stage 2 line can be a bit awkward sometimes, and whilst you may be thinking, okay, this is only stage 1s, there's still 3 of them, so you're still going to end up with a Psyduck in the active, but a Starmie in your hand, and you're not going to have the right pieces that all fit together. So sometimes these little not clunk issues, but just little inconsistencies can cause the deck to sometimes fall apart and not fully be able to meet its win condition. But it still teaches a lot about the game, and I think whilst it does sometimes fall prey to these little things like not quite having the right stage 1 in that situation, these things are going to happen with every deck. So it's another deck that even if you're not sort of finding all of these perfect win conditions each time, you're knowing that happens with every deck and things like that. It's just, I think it's a really, really good deck that teaches a lot of different things about the Pokemon trading card game in general. A lot of different abilities and sort of attacks that you can use and see what attacks fit the game the best. So I think this is, whilst it's not at the top of our list, like we're saying, it's one of the best decks on here just for learning purely about the game. So next up we have Gyarados, which is another sort of pretty fully water deck. However, this does have one-hit KO potential. In fact, it can do 210 damage for a single energy attachment, which is huge damage. That's knocking out a lot of relevant megas in the format at the moment. It's knocking out a lot of pretty much all EXs in the format, a lot of GXs. You know, this is doing a lot of damage, all on a non-EX as well, which means that you're going to be winning the prize trade a lot of the time, which is definitely really good. Gyarados having Theta Double means that you can play a few more tools and alternate forms of draw power, whether it's Octillery or actually Lucky Helmet, which is another really cool one for Gyarados, means that you can't be sort of your opponent may try and N you, which is a card that shuffles your hand back into your deck, and you only draw as many prize cards. You draw cards up to as many prize cards as you have left, and that's a lot of ways. That's a lot of the time the win condition against Gyarados. They take a lot of prizes, then you end them down to a low hand size. You knock out their attacker, and they can't set up another Pokemon to knock you out because you've only got a low hand size. But with these alternate forms of draw power, whether it's Octillery, like we say, or the Lucky Helmet, it means that you're going to be drawing more cards and being able to cycle into the win the next turn, as we've been saying. And then it's pretty much played the exact same way every matchup. You set up a Gyarados, you throw 3 Magikarps on the bench whilst you've got Magma Secret Base out, which does damage to all of the Magikarp, and then you do huge damage with Gyarados. It's rinse and repeat every single matchup. That's the way you win the game. You deal a lot of damage, you take 6 prizes, you do it quickly. That's there's no matchup that you do anything different, really.
Yeah, definitely. It's in that sort of fashion, because it is so linear in how it tries to win. You put those Magikarps down, they're all sat there with 10 HP on your bench. It does open up the biggest flaw of the deck at the same time. Any deck that does have sniping, or decks that can place multiple damage counters around the board, is basically an auto loss. It's like no way that Gyarados can win. Gyarados doesn't really have the space to tech for these sorts of things outside of Mr. Mime. And obviously placing counters gets around Mr. Mime. So you pretty much just take the loss to that deck if they do happen to have the answers. And Sun and Moon has brought a few of those sorts of archetypes, unfortunately. So Gyarados has been popular in the past. Always been like everyone's #1 rogue, if that makes sense. It's always in the back of people's minds, but some brave people play it, and they have done well with it when they just make the right meta call. But in Sun and Moon, there's Decidueye, there's Espeon, and there's also Umbreon, which all causes issue for Gyarados. So as these archetypes sort of find their feet in the format, that could be really awkward for the deck. Additionally, it's pretty ability focused. Even if you're not using Octillery, you do need that Shaman, not only turn 1, but throughout the game a lot of the time, because you do dig for pieces. Need to find more puzzles, need to find your stadium all over again, you need to find revives and buddy rescues and stuff like that. So it's pretty annoying when you are under the ability lock. Also, you need to, just like we were saying with Houndoom Mill, Gyarados is a very specific and particular archetype where you need to be purchasing some sorts of cards like Magma Secret Base that we mentioned, which pretty much only goes into Gyarados and you can't play anywhere else, so that could be pretty awkward. Additionally, Giratina EX does shut down this deck quite heavily. Not only do you not have the ability to attach double color synergy, which is your form of attack, it also means you can't put down a stadium. So if they replace your stadium and attack with Chaos Wheel, it means that you can never really get damage back with your Magikarps as they start getting knocked out. So you slowly just get whittled down to doing nothing, really, which is very unfortunate. And Giratina is pretty much a hard counter to Gyarados, in my opinion. Even if you are going to play things like Pokemon Ranger or like one of Enhanced Hammer, I still think Giratina should have the tools to beat you. And another thing to be aware of, although I'm saying Sun and Moon is already posing challenges for it, Gyarados is going to be gone soon. It is in Ancient Origins, I believe, so it's likely to rotate, definitely, in a short amount of time. So although the deck is powerful now, it may not last long.
Yeah.
onto Greninja now. Greninja's an archetype which basically since it came out has been tinkered around with, and it came second at Worlds. It's got a good resume. It's got plenty of top cuts and such. There's a big list of strengths and weaknesses to this deck. In the early game, it sets up very similarly. Turn 1, you get your Froakies down. Turn 2, you water duplicates. Turn 3, you get into Greninjas. Turn 4, you start trying to find your breaks. It's all very simple. Just dig for your Pokemon is basically the entire strategy of Greninja in the first 4 turns of the game. So in terms of that regard, it's very easy to play because your first 4 turns against almost anything is relatively similar, pretty much identical. But those turns onwards, it can get a little bit more tricky. Greninja does have some options available to it. It has lots of disruption as well. It can ability lock with Shadow Stitching. It has energy denial, either with Jirachi promo or with enhanced hammers. It has hand reduction with cards like N and Ace Trainer, because Greninja typically loses prizes in the opening turns because it's not really forcing any damage and you have low HP Pokemon. So you can try and punish your opponent by making their hands awkward, reducing them so that they don't really have answers to your deck in the future turns when you start building your board much greater and become much bigger threats on the field. Also, the deck has great sniping for board control and also big swing turns. This is where you are able to get 2 Greninja breaks onto the field. Giant Water Shuriken does 6 counters to one of your opponent's Pokemon when you discard a water energy from your hand if the break is in the active position. So you can use that once, retreat into another one, use that again. That's 120 damage before you even attack. And that's incredible. So if you include a Moonlight Slash, where you return the energy to the hand, that can be a 200 damage turn all to the active, or that can be 260 snipes here or there, finishing off math to make it perfect to deal with the opponent's board in whatever way you like. Really good for lower HP Pokemon, of course. Also, targeting Shaymins for easy prizes. Lots of potential with Greninja once it does get into this big combo. And also, like we were saying with Golduck, it has Dive Ball available. Also, things like Level Ball, even Repeat Ball has been played in Greninja sometimes. So, lots of Pokemon search options. And again, it can abuse Splash Energy. There's no surprise that we are showing a lot of water decks. It's not like a coincidence. It's because they do have a lot of these thematic cards that can help out budget decks. It has Splash Energy available so that we can recycle these Pokemon and maintain a strong board state. So that's another strength for the Greninja player.
Yeah, definitely. And Greninja's a personal sort of, and it's if Talonflame's Joe's pet deck, I guess this is of the list my pet deck. This is the deck that didn't get me back into the game, but I took sort of a hiatus for about 3 or 4 months at the start of last year. And this is the deck that got me back into the game. I took it to Nationals and had so much fun with it. It's when it works, it's an incredibly strong board setup, and very little decks can actually deal with it. There's a few that just sort of win out against Greninja anyway, but having 170 HP and being able to pressure snipe damage all across the board, and having access to sometimes maybe you can get away with throwing Rough Seas or something, means that you're the HP of an EX, but only giving up 1 prize and still applying so much pressure. So Greninja, when it sets up, can be a real formidable force, but its weaknesses are pretty big weaknesses, and sometimes they overcome whether it's worth playing the deck or not. So the deck is incredibly ability focused. Giant Water Shuriken is what this deck is all about. The aim is to get your Greninja breaks out as soon as possible, just because of how good this ability is. And with, as we said, with the Golduck deck, and we're going to mention it in a couple of the decks in the future, it's very ability focused, and I think this deck is hurt the most by Garbodor at the moment, or definitely one of the most. It has very few answers to Garbodor, which is one of the most popular ability locking cards in the format at the moment, in a couple of the most popular decks in the format at the moment. So you are going to be seeing some Garbodor being played, sort of without a doubt, and that means you're not going to have the access to this great ability anymore. There are a couple of niche techs you can play here and there that I personally have tried, that I've taken to tournaments, and some of them do work, but they're not sort of answers to Garbodor. They are sort of little get-arounds that sometimes will buy you a turn or two, and sometimes can win you the game, but they're not sort of out-and-out counters to Garbodor, so to speak. Also, as we've said, the game plan is turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4. you have 4 turns, and it takes 4 turns to fully build this board setup. And with the pace that some of the decks in the format are at the moment, your opponent can have taken 2 or 3 prizes by the time you get to that board state. And sometimes that can be, even with access to things like Ace Trainer and N, that can still be too much for the Greninja player to overcome. That constant pressure can still be a bit of an issue, especially if they are able to hit this 170 on Greninja breaks. The biggest thing about Greninja is trying to tank and still apply pressure. And if your opponent can hit through your 170 HP, a lot of the time with EXs, they're just sort of so much further ahead in tempo than you, because they're a basic and you're a break, which is essentially a stage 3. You miss out that middle stage with Frogadier, or one of the stage with Frogadier, so it's still a stage 2. But again, compare that to a basic, that can be a real issue. The opening turns are pretty make or break for the deck. If you don't get turn 1, often 2 Froakies down nowadays, into turn 2 Frogadier sort of every game, that's another turn on your opponent's clock to be able to take another knockout, get another prize, get even more ahead in the game, and just stop your setup in general. So the opening turns, within sort of 3 or 4 turns, you know whether the Greninja player is going to win more often than not, simply because if they'll either have 2 Greninja breaks out, or they won't, and they'll have missed something, and they'll have missed their Frogadier, or they'll have missed their energy, and their board state will be so much worse. And then finally, as I've been saying, continuous setup of stage 2s and breaks is quite taxing on a deck. It means that you're going to have to constantly find these resources. And whilst we do have a lot of good Pokemon search, obviously everything being dive ball searchable and some of these other ball cards that we can play, it's still a lot of resources. And if you can't maximize your resources and keep these players on the field, keep these Greninja breaks on the field, that's a lot of resources that you've wasted to then try and regain the control and set up another Greninja break. So it's such a fun deck when it doesn't sort of clunk itself out, and that's the biggest thing. I think this is one of the decks that you have to really try before you buy, just because some people completely hate the game being decided on the first 3 turns. This isn't a deck that can often swing games too far back in its favor. It has to set up the Greninja breaks to be able to bring these swing turns into play. And if it can't do that, then a lot of the times there's no way the Greninja deck will win. But it's definitely one to try, and I think with Choice Band it could potentially again see a little bit more play. It could get a little bit better. At the moment, the damage output can be kind of awkward just because everything's gaining more HP, so Giant Water Shuriken is becoming a less and less relevant number. But with Choice Band, maybe we will see Greninja come out of the shadows again and try its best at taking down a tournament. So it's definitely one to try. I definitely implore you to try it, but it's just a deck that isn't for some people.
Yeah, definitely. Love your Greninja rant there. Okay, let's look at Vespiquen Variants. We've sort of lumped this all together because Vespiquen is a deck that really sort of adapts on a almost weekly basis, really, based on what you expect in the format and what you expect to face in any given tournament. Vespiquen basically represents the main attacker of a deck, and then you fill it with lots of other Pokemon, ones that either have weakness on other popular decks or can just sort of handle the format in a good way. If not, they're just going to be in there to increase the damage output and consistency of Vespiquen in general. Some strengths of the deck is that it has O-hit KO potential for a single energy attachment. Definitely when Vespiquen reaches the mid to late game, its output gets very large. Its attack for a double colorless energy deals 20 base, and 10 more for each Pokemon in your discard pile. So obviously, by naturally your opponent is taking knockouts, and the fact that you play lots of discard cards, Professor Sycamores, Ultra Balls, Acrobikes, and you're actively looking to put Pokemon in the discard pile, this can get very large very quickly. Also, like I said, the deck is good because you tech for specific decks. If you know that your field or the metagame is looking towards certain decks, you can tech towards that, which is cool. And what's even cooler is, because there are so many options with Vespiquen, you can choose exactly how much you want to spend in a Vespiquen deck. You can go, for some of the new Sun and Moon Eeveelution GXs, for example, and have lots of different type coverages. You could go for Passimian, you could go for Zoroark, you could go for all sorts of different things to cover Vespiquen, even things like Yamega, even The new Shiinotic can help out Vespiquen. There are so many options for the deck. So picking what you want to play, how you want to play Vespiquen personally, and towards your budget, and figure out the best way that you can make the best deck possible on your sort of terms is going to be really cool for you. A few other strengths, Zoroark specifically, with its standard ability, is really good for being able to move around your board, not being Lysander stalled, and also keeps your opponent's bench in check with its attack, which is very nice. And typically Vespiquen is a heavily non-EX focused deck. Definitely if you're going for a budget build, you won't even be playing Shaman. You'll look for things like Octillery and Oranguru instead for terms of draw, alongside things like Unknown. So being a full non-EX deck is oftentimes difficult to play around, especially like we say, in the late game, you can knock out pretty much anything in the game.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting archetype. However, there are some weaknesses. We've just talked about Zoroark and Octillery. Both of them have really strong abilities, but again, it's another ability-reliant deck. That's sort of a general theme that we have to think about in the format right now. Garbodor is an inherently good card, and because of that, we have to think about how much our deck uses abilities. So sometimes there's going to be lists that don't work out as well. If there's a Garbodor heavy format, then maybe you are going to have to adapt your list a little bit. There's another deck that Giratina EX sort of preys on. Because you're only running 4 DCE pretty much the majority of the time, you have to be able to find your Ranger or another way of dealing with Giratina EX for a turn, just to attach your energy and be able to carry on progressing in the game. But sometimes Tina can just lock you out of the game, which is an inherent downside. As we've been saying, the deck does change pretty much bi-weekly. There's a new tournament, or there's usually a big regional size tournament every 2 or so weeks. And Vespiquen will try and adapt to the previous 2 weeks' results, seeing what did well, how it worked, and how Vespiquen can abuse what did well. Which means that the lists, pretty much every Vespiquen list you'll see, maybe 1 week will be very similar, but then the next time you see Vespiquen do well, the list could be completely different. The 4 cards that are the same are just the Vespiquens. There's going to be a lot of changing in these lists, so it may not be the first deck you pick up simply because it may not be a 60 card deck. It may actually be a 90 card deck that you just fit 60 cards into fit the current meta game. It's not always an easy deck to play. I think it's one of the most difficult decks to play on our list, and I think it's genuinely quite a difficult deck to play anyway. There's a lot of specific numbers and a lot of resource management, and you have to know your win condition for a lot of different archetypes. It's not a case of some of these decks where you set up and just do the same thing until you've taken 6 prizes. Sometimes there are specific attackers that you have to get out to win a matchup. Sometimes you don't use Vespiquen until right at the end. Sometimes you have to apply this early pressure with Vespiquen. There's a lot. You need to know how to play the deck. And then finally, whilst Zoroark and Octillery and a lot of the other cards that you maybe see in a Vespiquen deck aren't soon to rotate, the Vespiquen itself, again, is pretty likely to rotate. We're assuming that the rotation is going to be Primal Clash, Roaring Skies, and Ancient Origins, and that includes Vespiquen. So we're likely to see Vespiquen rotate around September. This is less of a big deal simply because Vespiquen is only an uncommon. So maybe you're still willing to buy these commons and uncommons just because it's not too much. But it's worth noting that they are soon to rotate, and even if it's not about the economic standpoint, you won't be able to play this deck in standard, so it may not be worth investing a lot of time into knowing exactly how to play the deck for it to not be legal in September.
Yeah, absolutely. Quick note on the Giratina EX. I should have mentioned in there that you can actually tech Marowak as a Pokemon in the deck. I know Andrew Mahone recently did that in his winning list for an ARG tournament. So although Giratina is a weakness, there are things, like you said, Jack, there's Ranger that you could play, or even Marowak if you're very paranoid about it. I'm not saying Marowak fixes the matchup, but it definitely helps keep it in check. Because basically Giratina has to knock out the Marowak before they knock out a Vespiquen, and if they do that, it allows you to 2-hit into a Giratina. It's all very complicated, but Giratina can be checked, although it is in general a weak point and forces you to make changes with your Vespiquen deck.
Yeah. So next up we have another deck featuring Zoroark Eeveelutions, one that's always sort of seen relative success, but I think with the new GXs could be another really strong archetype again. So Oko potential for single energy attachment. Zoroark does 10 damage plus 30 for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. There's a lot of decks at the moment that are running the Hooper Shaman engine, or at least the Shaman engine. That means they're benching a lot of Pokemon. If they're benching 5 Pokemon, you're doing 160 for a DCE, which is really, really strong. With Kukui, that's 180. That's knocking out an EX Pokemon. And then you've got things that I'll get onto a second, mainly in the evolutions, that mean you don't even need them to bench a load of Pokemon because you can hit for a lot of weaknesses. So yeah, Zoroark has a real high damage potential in himself. The ability for him his ability is really good as well, and he does have a break as well, which we haven't got on here, but it's another really, really nice card that maybe you can pick up 1 or 2 of. They shouldn't be too expensive, but they can copy any attack that your opponent has. So it's another sort of level to play around, that your opponent has to play around as well. They don't want to throw up something that you can just use their attack and knock out the next turn anyway. So if you're looking to immediately start with this deck, there are a couple of relatively cheap options for some of these good catch cards in sets that can really, really improve the deck. Zoroark itself, as I've mentioned, provides flexibility with the Zoroark break, but also with his ability, letting you rush into the Zoroark every turn means that you can't really be Lysander stalled. As long as you've got your abilities online, you can rush into the active and be able to Mind Jack for another turn. So it means Lysander stall, which can be a genuine sort of stall tactic in some games, isn't an option, which is really, really good. Great type coverage, as I've said. A lot of these lists will run the evolutions. That's why we've paired Zoroark with the evolutions for now. There's the 3 from Ancient Origins that are Flareon, Jolteon, and Vaporeon. That for all of your stage 1s, while their abilities are online, they also include each of their respective types. So that means you're going to be one-shotting a lot more things. There's a lot of grass in the format at the moment. There's a couple of metal decks as well. So Flareon covers those. Volcanion, which is a deck we're going to talk about a little bit later on. Vaporeon is really, really good against the Volcanion deck, yeah. And then Jolteon covers things like Yveltal and Ray. Ray is quite a popular archetype, and Yveltal is, in some people's eyes, one of the best decks in format. So if they can't get their Garbodor online quickly, you're sometimes able to abuse that by taking a few cheeky prizes with Jolteon before they get their Garbodor up, and sometimes that can swing the matchup in your favor. And finally, you can build the deck to your budget. I've mentioned the GX Pokemon. You can start with this list with no GX Pokemon, and maybe if you do like the deck, you can buy into a couple of these. I think Umbreon GX is one of the best fitting cards, though the Espeon GX is another really, really good card that fits into the deck well. But you can just start with these cards rather than having to fork out for 4 GXs. You can just maybe pick up 1 or 2 of either of them, and trying to apply that into your deck as well, which is really, really nice. Both of the GXs, the new GXs, do have quite a lot of synergy with Zoroark. They both work off of DCE. So yeah, there's a lot of synergy between the new GXs and Zoroark.
Absolutely. As we mentioned earlier, it is also somewhat ability focused. We keep going back to it. Ability lock is a big thing in the format, so you do have to be aware of it. The deck isn't shut down without its abilities, but stand-in is sometimes a big element. And also the Eeveelutions abilities can get shut down. Your good matchup against the Yveltal player could go into a mediocre matchup as soon as the Jolteon gets turned off by Garbodor, so bear that in mind. Eeveelutions, just the type coverage ones, are soon to rotate because they are in Ancient Origins, so that's also potentially awkward for you, although again, Jolteon's a holo, the other 2 are just uncommon, so that shouldn't be too awkward, other than the fact that you may have to adapt your deck in the future. However, even looking at like Japanese lists and stuff who are already ahead of us in terms of the format, the decks are still strong, so that's not too big of a deal. Giratina EX again is an issue. The deck is focused on double colours a lot of the time. If you do choose to play the Zoroark break, that can be a huge mitigating factor, and so can the Umbreon GX. Using Dark Claw GX to get rid of both of Giratina's energy could be really good for you, and the Zoroark break can actually copy Chaos Wheel to stop them putting any more double dragon energies down, and because it can actually tank a hit from a Giratina because it has 140 HP, you can actually overcome that quite nicely. So Giratina is a spanner in the works, but by no means like an auto loss. It is a continuous setup of stage 1s, So it's not always consistent. Not only do you have to keep getting Zoroark lines going, but trying to find these one-of Eeveelutions in the right situation can also be awkward, even with a thick line of Eevees in there. So that's something to be aware of. And also, the opponent can be in control of the damage at times. Zoroark deals 30 times the number of your opponent's bench Pokemon, not your own. So if they basically see a Zorua turn 1 and go, oh okay, I'll just try and keep my bench at 2 or 3 Pokemon all game, obviously that could potentially hurt their setup and slow them down, but in doing so, it limits the overall output that Zoroark can churn out throughout the game.
Yeah.
Next up we have Passimian. Passimian's a deck that I actually really like. When I first saw Passimian on Sun and Moon, it was one of my favourite cards. Just looking at it from a baseline. Testing it as well has been enjoyable. I think it's a very fun, very cool archetype to pick up, definitely. It's another one that I would highly recommend to people if you are a new player getting into the game, because it is very, very easy to play. You just have to put your bench down full of Passimians and attack with Mew for the majority of the time using its ability Memories of Dawn. And that means that you're doing, for a double colours energy, 130 damage with 4 Passimians on your bench, which is excellent. And yeah, it's very easy to play because you're going to do that every single game, basically. Just find Passimians and start swinging. That's all you really need to do. Also, the deck has great type coverage, especially right now in the current format. Yeah. Passimian can one-hit KO even a Fighting Fury Belted Darkrai EX if you choose to play Fighting Fury Belt yourself, or you use Professor Kukui thanks to your fighting typing, and Mew thanks to your psychic typing. As long as you have your abilities online, you are able to one-hit KO Mega Mewtwo's and also Espeon GX's. So the typing is fantastic because it really does pose a threat to 2 of the most popular decks and the most successful decks in the format right now. So that is absolutely excellent. Picking up almost 3 wins against them is hilarious for what is currently still just a rogue deck, but it's still a new archetype to come from Sun and Moon, so it may still be picking up traction and support. Also, the deck is non-EX focused. You're going to use Oranguru for your draw power. You're just going to use lots of Nest Balls and just fully focus on Passimian and Mew alone with no other Pokemon in there. And again, this is one that could be getting better in the future. This is, because it's such a simple shell of a deck, you only need 10 Pokemon, you only need 4 DCE. The rest of the deck is space for you to do whatever you want with it. So in the future, as more cards come out, it could easily get better. Choice Band improves its numbers, because then Choice Band and Professor Kukui gets you to 170, which is of course a golden number in a lot of situations. So have that in mind for certain. But just as more cards get revealed, because the shell is going to be so consistent, you can just try different things out and see how it turns out in the future. So I'm very excited for this archetype, basically throughout its career, because it's so simple and effective.
Yeah, definitely. A really, really good deck to pick up and start the game with. However, again, Ability Focus and Giratina EX are 2 things that we keep mentioning. Obviously, this deck pretty much relies on 4 DCE. Skyfield is a big thing, the tools are a big thing, but the main thing is DCE is your energy for your damage output, and Giratina can shut your deck down by not letting you play these DCE anymore. Obviously, as we've mentioned, there are things like ranges that can get around Giratina, but it's always going to be awkward. It's a very, very difficult matchup. If they can set up 1 Tina, it's difficult. If they can set up 2 Tina, it's I think it's near impossible. There's a lot you have to do to be able to keep up with the Giratina player. And again, it is ability focused. Memories of Dawn is sort of another. It's a plus 30. It means that you can attack with Mew rather than Passimian, meaning you've got an extra Passimian on the bench, meaning that you're doing an extra 30. But if you don't have Memories of Dawn online, it's going to mean that you have to attack with Passimian himself. And because of that, you're lowering your damage output by 30, which means you're going to have to maybe sometimes lose a two-hit war, and maybe with some of these stronger GXs, you can't quite reach the nice numbers anymore to be able to two-shot some of these strong Pokemon. So it can be an issue. Again, obviously, Oranguru is another card that's pretty big for the deck. It's another deck that your opponent will try and knock out your Pokemon with the DC on it and then end you to a low hand size as well, so you can't sort of draw into your win condition again. Oranguru is going to help you out by instructing up to 3 cards. But because of that, if they've turned off your Oranguru as well, it's going to mean you have to draw exactly what you need, or draw into exactly what you need. So that can be another issue, which can be difficult to deal with. And finally, as we've said, the damage cap is awkward sometimes when not hitting for weakness. We've just stated 2 decks that are possibly the 2 most popular decks, or 2 of the most popular decks in the format at the moment, in Mewtwo and Turbo Dark. So obviously you've got incredibly good matchups against them, but against anything that isn't being one-shot by a Mew because of weakness or whatever, it's going to mean that a lot of the time you're going to have to really push for your wins. It's nowhere near as nice as hitting for weakness, of course, but there are a lot of decks out there that aren't weak to you as well. So it's worth noting. However, as we've said, again, watch this space simply because Choice Band could be a big deal for this deck. It fixes a lot of numbers. It makes a lot of numbers nicer. It means a Mew with a Choice Band and a Kukui is doing 180 to anything. Doesn't matter if you've got weakness or not. So again, there's definitely a lot of potential for this deck. And moving into our second place is Aquabox, a deck that's recently seen some success over on the Anaheim regionals a couple of weekends ago. Got top 32 there, so this is obviously a really, really strong archetype. The strengths of the deck: Lapras GX has 190 HP. With the water typing, we've got access to Rough Seas, and being a basic, we have access to Fury Belt, so that could potentially 230 HP with a heal of 30 every turn. You've got free retreat, essentially, as long as you've got a water energy on with Manaphy, and you're running purely water energy, so you're going to have a lot of these water energy to attach, meaning that you're able to get more sort of healing for each Rough Seas that you play, each turn that it's in play. You're going to be able to move around and heal a bit more damage, which is really, really strong. And it means that your Laprases are going to be difficult to knock out, which I think is the biggest thing here. It's going to mean that your opponent can't fulfill their win condition simply because you're just not letting them knock out your Pokemon. Alternate means of draw: the top 32 list, played Lucky Helmet, which is a really, really interesting choice. It means that, again, you've just got more cards to be able to use and consistently set up your Lapras GXs. It's got a pair of really, really interesting attacks. The sort of biggest issue is their damage output can be kind of awkward, but being able to chain these attacks through being able to draw a lot of cards and find your resources to carry on taking these 2-hit knockouts and things like that is really, really important. And you've also got a turn 1 collect, which is nothing to sleep on at all. Having that turn 1 collect means that you're not just passing for the turn, which a lot of decks do at the moment. They just don't have that 1 energy attack that you want, so they have to pass. With Lapras, you get to collect turn 1, draw 3 cards. Hey, worst comes to worst, your opponent ends you. But if they don't end you, you've just drawn 4 cards at the start of your turn instead of 1. So that's a huge deal. And again, you can build to your budget. Start off with Lapras and build around that. There's a lot of water Pokemon that you can play, a lot of water techs. So just pick and choose the ones that you want to try out. Try them out, and if you like them, that's when you can put your money into these different sort of water Pokemon that are out there at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Aquabox is still one that's being figured out in the format right now. Obviously, the top 32 list was very different from how it had been spoken about pre-tournaments, basically before Anaheim. Many people had expectations around this sort of deck, and they were basically thrown out the window after seeing the one that did well and how that did well. So it's still one that's being figured out. I think it's one that's going to remain quite good in the format just because it has good fundamentals of Pokemon. It has good HP. Fighting Fury Belt pushes its main attack to 170 damage, which again is still a decent golden number. Even its GX attack is being figured out more and more to be actually very awkward a lot of the time. You can win the game off of it on its own as long as it comes off and your opponent stays paralyzed. So with good acceleration from Palkia and Max Elixirs, you have good draw power, as you say, with Collect, with Lucky Helmets if you choose to play those. You can even try Octillery in here if you're playing heavy Dive Ball engine. Even just Oranguru, and you can play Nest Ball instead. There's a lot of flexibility with the deck, so it's a definite cool one. A few weaknesses, however, is that it is ability focused. Only the Manaphy really, this is where it comes into play. But if you get hit with a Garbodor, it is really awkward. Lapras likes moving between itself and either a second Lapras that's got set up, or another attacker, like another Palkia or a Glaceon, or whatever else you need in the situation. And Manaphy means that your high retreat costs can be ignored, and if Garbodor's around, it means that you need to find yourselves like Olympia that you play or something like that, which can be awkward. Also, its typing is awkward. Lapras is weak to grass, as is Palkia. These are pretty much the two main stars of the deck. And grass is a powerful archetype, unfortunately. There's Vespiquen, there's Decidueye, there's Lurantis GX. There's all these different decks right now threatening Aquabox, and Glaceon EX is really the only defense you have against them. And sometimes it's simply not enough, especially because some Vespiquen players are playing Ranger anyway to try and counter Giratina now. It makes Glaceon's effectiveness a lot less useful, which is awkward. And finally, the deck is quite combo-paced. You are looking to hit elixirs, you're looking to find energy switches, you're trying to get rolling on the first turn as best as possible. And even in the winning list, they had a lot of reactive cards in there. They had heavy enhanced hammer and things like that. So it can sometimes clunk out the deck. And especially when you're not playing Shaman and you're using alternative Bull Search, it can just get clunky sometimes, and you'll end up having to collect not only on the first turn of the game, but also the second, and it can just end up being quite slow for you.
Yeah, I think it's an archetype that we will see a lot more of in the future. But it's one, like you say, people are still figuring out the perfect way to use Lapras in this Aquabox style.
Alrighty, let's have a look at our number one deck. It's the same winner as last time. It's going to be Volcanion. Volcanion is not only one of the best budget decks right now, but it's just one of the best decks in the game that we have. It just so happens that Volcanion EX itself is in a tin that you can get. The non-EX Volcanion is a League promo as well as a Theme Deck promo. So very easy to get the two main components of this deck. And really it's a very simple deck to play. You try and early on get lots of Volcanion EXs down using their abilities Steam Up to increase your damage output on the Volcanion non-EX that for just 1 energy does 20 damage as a baseline and allows you to attach 2 fire energy to 2 of your Pokemon on the bench, which is very good because Volcanion EX has an expensive attack cost in Volcanic Heat. But when you're steaming up anyway to increase the damage output of your non-EX Volcanion, you're getting sometimes even 2 hit KOs for 1 energy on turn 1, whilst at the same time getting the additional benefit of attaching energy to your bench for your other attackers. That's why you can see as another strength it has really good energy acceleration. The attack of non-EX Volcanion is fantastic, and oftentimes you also play Max Elixir to get even more fire energies out of the deck and onto your board. Once you do move into your Volcanion EX, it definitely has 1 hit KO potential. The Volcanic Heat attack has a baseline of 130 damage, but using Steam Ups multiple times, you can easily get up to, I think 250 is the total that you can get to. So that's a huge number. That's before we factor in Fighting Fury Belt and Kukui as well. So it can get really nuts when you have the big swing turns. And also the deck has aggression from turn 1, as we say, with these Steam Ups. And it's just very consistent. It's a mainly non-EX deck. And everything it's all centered around finding energy. And because you're playing so many of them in your list, and it's so easy to find them, it's really rare that you're not going to start your approach to the matchup in pretty much any scenario.
Yeah, it's one of the decks that is really, really good in general. It's not just a good budget deck, like we've said. It's got a lot of really, really good matchups out there. Obviously, we've been saying how grass can be an awkward typing for these water decks. And obviously, Volcanion can then abuse that in itself. So it's kind of a little trifecta. But I think Volcanion is one of the most consistent of the 3 types of deck that do that. So just finding energy is the main thing. However, as with, I think, probably the last 4 or 5 decks, it is pretty heavily ability focused. Garbodor can be an issue because it means that you can't reach these big sort of swing turns. It also means that if you're playing an auxiliary or Starmie build, which is the way you would play it without the Hooper Shaman engine, you can't sort of recycle your energy or keep drawing cards. And Hex is another one that's really big. At least with Garbodor, you can Lysander kill it without having to use your abilities. But with Hex, you can't use your abilities for that turn. So it's not like a constant threat. It just means that a well-timed Hex on your opponent's side can mean they can sort of keep up with your consistency. So that's definitely something to note. And I think it's one of the decks on the list that probably performs the best with the Hooper Shaman engine. Out of the decks we've talked about, this is the one that you're probably going to see the Hooper Shaman engine in the most. Simply because Hooper searches out your damage buffs and then a Shaman to draw you more cards, which draws you more energy, which buffs your damage, which means you're taking more knockouts. It all really synergizes really well together. So if there's a deck that you do want to put your money in to with Shamans and Hoopers, this is the deck to do it if you want to stick to this budget list. And finally, Volcanion EX. His attack cost is 3 and his retreat cost is 3. So one, that means things like Mewtwo and Yveltal, which are two decks that we've spoken about today, that also run Garbodor, can then abuse your Volcanions having a high attack cost, simply because they're going to be doing more damage to you anyway. So that's worth noting. And at a retreat cost of 3, whilst you are going to be playing a lot of switching cards, a lot of float stones maybe, or a lot of physical switching cards, copies of these cards, it can, if you don't find these cards, Lysander Stall can be an issue. With Through Retreat, it means that you are going to have to manually attach 3 energy. There's no quick way of doing it, unfortunately, in this deck. It's all based on max elixirs, which go to the bench rather than the active. So because of that, Lysander Stall can sometimes be a win condition for your opponent. But yeah, I think Volk, it's seen a lot of success, whether it's, even if it's not wins, it's seen a huge amount of top 32s, one of the most consistent decks in the format at the moment. A lot of decks strive to be this consistent, and it's got a lot of really good matchups out there just because of how consistent it is. So I think it's sort of first place on the list is well earned. It's a really, really good deck, and it's another deck that teaches you quite a lot about the game, just resource management and finding that one extra energy for that one extra steam up to swing the game into your favor is a really, really sort of good thing to learn.
Yeah, and it's a fun one as well. Everyone likes just motoring through the deck and just trying to get these big knockouts. It can just be a nice deck to play in general. So super consistent, fun to play, and you can also start small by going via the auxiliaries and via the Starmie routes. And if it turns out you're really happy with the deck, you can choose to invest more if need be down the line. So it ticks a lot of boxes, Volcanion, and it's just a good archetype in general. So that is going to round out our top 10 list. Hope you all enjoyed. If there's a deck maybe that you have enjoyed playing as a budget player, slap it down in the comments below. Let us know your favourite from our list as well. And anything else that we've missed or you'd like to add, we'd love to hear from you all. Hopefully this has helped out some new players as well as experienced players looking to save a few bob here and there. So yeah, anything else, Jack?
No, I think the biggest thing is just try, if you're looking at this from an outsider's point, whether to perhaps invest into the game, just try it out. It's a really, really fun game, and it's one of the cheaper games to get into from what I've heard. I've been speaking to a couple of people about some of the other TCGs out there at the moment, and ignoring Shaman, it's one of the cheapest to get into. So give it a go. Maybe you'll like it. Try some of the decks out, and if there's anything, if there's any lists that you maybe want to talk about, get it down in the comments. We want to talk to you guys about what lists you think are good. So yeah, give these lists a try and let us know how they all work out for you.
Absolutely. So leave a like to this video if you did, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. But for now, from me and Jack, we will be seeing you in another video.